So you have 9 people at this drug and alcohol-fueled party at this famous celebrity's house in England. And by the end of the night, one of the partygoers is found dead, floating face up in the pool. He had injuries to his face and neck like he was suffocated. And evidence shows that he had severe injuries consistent with being SA'd. Yet police initially said that he just accidentally drowned, that no foul play was involved, even though the celebrity who held the party reportedly removed items from his home prior to the paramedics arriving, like a pool thermometer and a broken handle to a shed. This celebrity has since gone on to continue his career in the public eye, even going on shows like Big Brother UK. He's even on TikTok ignoring comments that someone was murdered at his house 25 years ago. But so many people think that all 7 people who attended his party that night know exactly who killed this man. And since this is still unsolved, let's talk about it. This is Stuart Lubbock. He was only 31 years old when he suddenly and very mysteriously died in 2001. At the time of his death, Stuart had 2 young daughters and was living with his dad and brother in Harlow, Essex. Stuart was really close with his family, and he relied on them in the months before his death because he separated from his children's mother. Everyone who knew him said he was super social, loving, and just a really good and hardworking man. And by all accounts, he was just your typical 31-year-old man who was just trying to navigate life. That is, until March 30th, 2001. That night, Stuart and his older brother went out drinking at this really popular nightclub called the Millennium. It was a well-liked place in the community, but it wasn't a spot where you'd typically see celebrities. But that night, Stuart ran into one in the bathroom. This celebrity's name is Michael Barrymore, and Michael is a really famous UK TV presenter and comedian. He's hosted a lot of kids and comedy shows, but in 2001, he was just getting back to the height of his career. In 1995, Michael was doing a live show and announced that he was gay, which obviously isn't and shouldn't be a big deal. But at that time, he was married to a woman. And I guess his wife had no idea about his sexuality or that he was planning to announce it like that. So she said she felt blindsided. They ended up divorcing, but after this, Michael's career continued to thrive. So when Stuart saw him in the bathroom of this nightclub, he was so shocked and excited to be meeting a celebrity. So Michael and Stuart really hit it off, and Michael reportedly was giving him a lot of attention, which angered Michael's then-boyfriend, John. John was also at the nightclub that night, and he was reportedly getting a little bit jealous over how much attention Michael was giving Stuart. They actually ended up getting in a fight over this in front of other people. This didn't seem to bother Michael though, and he wanted the party to continue. So he invited Stuart and 7 other people back to his mansion in Roydon. Not invited was Stuart's brother, which is odd, but Stuart really just wanted to go, so he didn't care. Of the people invited back, we know of some of their names. Stuart, Kylie Merritt and her brother Justin, 2 of Michael's friends who lived nearby, James Feuders and Simon Shaw, 1 underage girl and another 21-year-old girl, and then Michael's boyfriend John. And since Michael was a celebrity, they all excitedly accepted the offer and began heading out to his house. While his boyfriend was actually in the bathroom though, Michael and Stuart left together and took a taxi back to his house. And this also reportedly really angered his boyfriend. And when he finally caught up to them and got back to Michael's house, he was livid. They had yet another fight in front of people. But once that calmed down, the party continued and everyone was drinking and doing party drugs. Now, since Stuart left his brother behind, he didn't really know anyone at this party and probably felt kind of uncomfortable. He also usually didn't do drugs, but it's been reported that Michael was kind of insisting, and he was seen by many people at the party actually putting some on his finger and physically rubbing it on Stuart's gums. Then 4 a.m. hits, and Stuart, Michael's boyfriend John, and one other person were in the hot tub seemingly having a good time. But at this point, it was getting late, and some of the partygoers wanted to go home, so they all kind of split up. Some went inside the house to get dressed, which is where Michael said he went. But 30 minutes to an hour later, when he comes back outside, this is when he discovers a horrifying scene. There, floating face up in the pool and very obviously dead, is Stuart. When paramedics arrived, they found John, Michael's boyfriend, trying to do CPR on Stuart, but it was no use. He was declared dead almost immediately. The initial pathologist on the scene examined Stuart's body, and he said that it seemed clear that he just accidentally drowned. There were traces of drugs and alcohol found in his system, so he wanted this to be an open and shut case. But then, more disturbing information was released, and it became clear that whatever happened to Stuart was no accident. So Stuart had clear injuries to his face and neck, specifically petechia, which are basically red and brown spots on the skin from broken blood vessels. These injuries indicate asphyxiation, and the medical examiner said that it seemed like Stuart was violently restrained to the point of suffocation, but that's not all they found. The medical examiner then discovered evidence that Stuart was violently SA'd. He had severe injuries to his including internal lacerations and bruising. He also had deep contusions on the back of his shoulders and at the base of his spine, likely from being restrained during the assault. He was also missing skin on the front of his neck, and this suggests that he was bent over a low and abrasive surface, almost like a hot tub wall, which, if you remember, is exactly where Stewart was right before he was found dead. This could suggest that he was asphyxiated from being violently bent over like this. It was very clear by these injuries that whatever happened to Stewart was not consensual, and he would have been in agony. So with all of these new findings, authorities took back the initial claim of accidental drowning, and they changed his manner of death to murder. To be honest though, this is where the story starts to get confusing, and from here on out, I don't know what or who to believe. So Stewart's body was found around 5 a.m., but paramedics weren't called until 5:46 a.m. So what were they doing in that time frame? Well, there's a lot to unpack. Two of the younger girls snuck back into the house, and there they reportedly heard the men talking about rape, which is awfully convenient given Stewart's gruesome injuries. But what's even crazier is that before paramedics arrived, if accurate, Michael did something incredibly bizarre and honestly incriminating. He reportedly started frantically rummaging through his house and took 3 items, which were a pool thermometer, a broken handle to his shed, and one of his hairbrushes, and he wrapped them all up in his clothes and took them to his nearby neighbor's house. And if you remember, 2 of the people at his party were his nearby neighbors, so why he reportedly took those items there, we don't know. Michael's other direct neighbors who were not at the party that night did come forward and said that they heard screaming coming from the home at around 5 a.m. on the night in question. They were never formally questioned, and they don't know whether this was a man or a woman screaming, or if it was a fun party scream or something far more sinister. But I do find this odd. But here's what's infuriating. So right off the bat, police did not treat this as a crime scene. They didn't secure it, they didn't collect any evidence, they didn't even immediately interview the people at the party, who were all still there by the way. They also reportedly didn't even fully search Michael's house. This was all based on the initial assumption that Stewart just accidentally drowned. So by not processing the scene correctly, almost all evidence was immediately destroyed or lost. After the initial pathologist ruled this as an accidental drowning, which was very obviously not the case, 3 other pathologists were brought in to examine his body, and they all confirmed that Stewart was indeed murdered. This kickstarted a massive internal investigation, which was conducted by an outside police force. Many people, including Stewart's family, thought that this case was botched so badly that it had to have been done on purpose. They thought that either there was some sort of corruption within Essex police, or because of how famous and popular Michael was, that he was able to use his influence to possibly and allegedly get away with murder. After the crime, Michael and his boyfriend John split up, and even though he had a lot of pull being a celebrity, his career was really damaged after this all surfaced, but that only lasted for a little while. Michael continued on with his career in TV, and in 2006, he even went on Big Brother UK. It's crazy that this was allowed to happen, and that everyone kind of just thought that it was normal. But at this point, Stewart's dad was furious. He wanted to know what really happened to his son, and police even publicly stated that all 8 people at the party that night know exactly what happened to Stewart. They might have not all killed him, but they all know who did and why. They just weren't saying. All of the partygoers that night kind of banded up together and remained silent on the events that took place that night. But while Michael was on Big Brother, Stewart's dad and lawyer actually tried to serve him papers live on TV in regards to Stewart's death. They were trying to pursue legal action and wanted Michael to be held responsible and be charged with 6 offenses, including murder. Big Brother producers didn't allow this to happen, but this obviously attracted more interest to the case. But ultimately, since police botched the investigation so badly, there was no evidence left tying Michael to the crime, so he was never charged. Over the years, there have been multiple arrests in this case, including Michael's ex-boyfriend, John, and 2 of the other people who were at the party that night. But again, since there was no evidence, none of them were ever charged. They were all released, and to this day, whoever killed Stewart is still out there. There was an inquest into this case, but it came to no conclusion, and they said that Stewart's death was literally a mystery. And although we don't know what exactly happened to him, there is one major theory, and that theory is that someone at the party that night killed him. A lot of people suspect Michael or even his ex-boyfriend because they were throwing the party. But again, I want to make it very clear for legal reasons that there is no evidence tying them to the crime. And I also don't want it to seem like I'm personally blaming or accusing Michael. That's not what I'm trying to do. I know he's here on TikTok, but I'm just simply laying out the facts of this case because it is still unsolved. And I also don't want any of you guys to go and leave him hate comments simply on my behalf. All I know is that drowning does not equal the injuries that Stewart had. Police believe that all 8 people who were at the party that night know exactly what happened. At least two of them do. The one who restrained Stewart and the one who SA'd him. And unless they speak up, this case will likely never be solved. Michael went on to live his life and is still a popular UK celebrity to this day. There was a documentary about this case released in 2020 called Barrymore, The Body in the Pool, which is pretty disturbing. And sadly, Stewart's dad died from terminal cancer in 2021 at 76, never knowing what really happened to his son. But it's now been 25 years, and whatever really happened to Stewart that night and why remains a mystery. Just when I think I've seen it all and nothing could get worse, I'm reminded of this man right here who would literally abduct women, fly them to his private property in Alaska, strip them naked, and then release them into the wilderness where he would then hunt them down and kill them with his hunting knives and rifles. He killed as many as 21 women the exact same way, yet it took police over 10 years to look into all of the women and girls who suddenly went missing in Anchorage, Alaska. And if you think, well, if there really are people like him, why don't I ever see them? And my answer to that is you do. He was a normal, small little man who owned a popular bakery. Everyone seemed to like him, yet he still got away with literally hunting these women like animals. And I can guarantee with all of the stuff we see being exposed today, there are more people just like him that have not been caught yet. This is the disturbing case of Robert Hansen, otherwise known as the Butcher Baker of Alaska. And I'm just giving you a fair warning right now that this is the stuff that nightmares are made of. So with that being said, let's talk about it. This is Robert Hansen. Robert grew up in Iowa with his mom and dad, and his dad actually owned a very successful bakery that Robert spent a lot of his youth working at. But Robert didn't have a great childhood. He was painfully shy because he had severe acne and a pretty bad stutter, and because of this, he would routinely get bullied in school. To mentally escape, Robert would spend a lot of his time hunting and doing archery in the woods, and this hobby stayed with him into adulthood. He was very well versed with guns and killing animals, and once an adult, he served 1 year in the United States Army Reserve. After he was discharged, he went on to work as an assistant drill instructor at a police academy in Pocahontas, Iowa. I'm only telling you this because it paints a picture of how everyone saw Robert and the kind of connections that he had. In 1960, he married a woman that he met at the police academy, but it didn't last long because in December of that year, he was arrested for burning down an Iowa school bus garage. He did it to get revenge on all of those people who bullied him growing up. He was sentenced to 3 years for this, but he only served 20 months, during which he was diagnosed with manic depression with periodic schizophrenic episodes. A psychiatrist said that he had an infantile personality and was obsessed with revenge, but still, they released him early. Robert's wife divorced him after this, which she definitely dodged a bullet, but over the next few years, he would be arrested multiple times for petty theft. In 1967, Robert got remarried and had 2 kids, and he wanted a fresh start, so he and his family ended up moving to Anchorage, Alaska. At least to everyone around him, Robert seemed to have turned his life around. He opened up his own bakery, was super well liked by the community, and even set a bunch of hunting records. Yeah, he was quiet and small and a little weird, but overall he flew under the radar. But of course, this didn't last very long though, because in December of 1971, he would be arrested 2 more times, and unfortunately, this wasn't for things like petty theft. His crimes were escalating and fast. He was first arrested for abducting a woman and attempting to SA her, and the second time he was arrested for actually SAing an unidentified sex worker. Robert pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon for the first crime, which essentially means that he accepted conviction and punishment without formally admitting his guilt. And then the SA charge involving the sex worker was dropped as part of a plea deal, which is infuriating. This time, Robert was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but somehow he was released after only serving 6 months. He was released as part of a work release program, but still, he very obviously was dangerous, yet no one seemed to care. Likely because he was going after sex workers, and no one wanted to believe them. It's believed that over the next 10 years, starting in 1971, Robert would begin to kill women. He started out with young girls between the ages of 16 to 19 who were down on their luck, and then he would target sex workers or women who he thought nobody would miss. He would stalk these women and learn their habits, and then he would offer to give them rides. Once inside the car, he would hold them at gunpoint, drive them back to his home, SA, and torture them. Robert would then strip them naked and release them into the wilderness, where he would then hunt them down and kill them by either stabbing them with his hunting knives or shooting them with his rifles. What's really sad is that over this 10-year period, so many women and young girls disappeared all around Anchorage. but police never really bothered looking into it. That is, until June 13th, 1983. That day, Robert offered 17-year-old Cindy Paulson $200 to perform sex acts on him. When she got in his car, he then held her at gunpoint and then drove her back to his home in Muldoon. He then held her captive, SAing her repeatedly and torturing her. Robert chained her by her neck to a post in the basement and then took a nap on a nearby couch. When he woke up, he took her to Merrill Field, where his private plane was waiting. Robert told Cindy that he was going to take her to a shack near the Nick River area of the Matanuska-Susitna Valley, which is only accessible by boat or plane, and that nobody would find her. He began packing up the cockpit of his plane as Cindy was crouched in the back seat of his car. Her wrists were handcuffed in front of her body. At one point, though, Robert had his back turned to her, and she saw this as the perfect opportunity to try and escape. So, still handcuffed, she quietly crawled out of his car and started sprinting to a nearby road, with Robert chasing closely behind. Just as he was about to catch up to her, Cindy was able to flag down a passing truck who stopped to help her and drove off, leaving Robert behind. The truck driver took her to a nearby motel where she ran inside and begged the clerk to let her use the phone to call her boyfriend, who was staying at another motel nearby called the Big Timber Motel. But the truck driver was obviously very concerned, so he called the police to let them know what happened. When Anchorage PD arrived, they found Cindy in the Big Timber Motel in one of the rooms. She was then taken to the police station where she told them everything. The description of her attacker and how she purposefully left her blue shoes on the passenger side floor in the back seat of his car as evidence that she was there. She was so incredibly brave and smart. From her description, though, police brought in Robert for questioning. He, of course, denied all of it and said that Cindy was just trying to get him in trouble because she was trying to extort him and he wouldn't pay her. This was an excuse he used a lot, and because of how small Robert was and his quiet and gentle demeanor, police viewed him as this humble, small-town baker who could do no harm. It also didn't help that his friend lied for him and said that he was with Robert all day when he wasn't. But because of all that, Anchorage PD released Robert and didn't even consider him a suspect in Cindy's abduction. But after they released him, more and more bodies would turn up around Anchorage, Seward, and the Matanuska-Susitna Valley area, and several women would begin to disappear into thin air. The first body that was found is only known as Eglutna Annie. Her real name and identity has never been discovered, but her body was found buried next to a power line in a wooded area near Eglutna Road. She was found on July 21st, 1980. Not long after this, the body of Joanna Messina was found buried in a gravel pit near Seward. 2 years later, the remains of 23-year-old Sherry Morrow were found in a shallow grave near the Nick River. So in just 2 years, you now had 3 women all murdered in the same area. And because of that, Anchorage police knew. These women were all killed by the same man. This wasn't just a one-off situation, but rather there was a serial killer on the loose, one who was moving incredibly fast. So the FBI was brought in to assist with the investigation, specifically Special Agent John Douglas. And based on evidence at the crime scene, John put together the killer's suspected profile. He believed that the killer was an experienced hunter with low self-esteem. He had a history of being rejected by women and might even keep souvenirs of his murders, like the victim's jewelry. And somehow, he even guessed that the killer might even have a stutter, which is crazy, and I don't know how he came to that conclusion. So with this profile in mind, police interviewed everyone in the area who could possibly fit, and eventually they landed on Robert Hansen. And what's weird is that Robert fit this description to a T, even down to the stutter, and he even owned a plane, which made killing and disposing of these women easier. So police got a warrant to search not only his plane, but his car, house, and properties, and they found some pretty disturbing things. There, they found jewelry that belonged to some of the missing and murdered women, as well as a huge stash of guns and weapons hidden in his attic. But that's not all they found, because hidden behind Robert's headboard was what police called a murder map. It was an aeronautical chart with 37 written X marks. Police didn't know it at the time, but each of those X marks were actually burial sites that Robert disposed of these women. As police were pulling out each piece of evidence, they showed it to Robert, and at first he tried denying all of it. But eventually he started to confess, but he still blamed his victims and tried to justify his actions. Needless to say, Robert was quickly arrested, and at the time of his arrest, he was only charged with the murders of 4 women: Eglutna Annie, Sherry Morrow, and Joanna Messina, whose bodies were first found, and then 30-year-old Paula Golding. Robert abducted Paula on April 25th, 1983. He flew her with his private plane to a really remote area, and Then he let her go. As she ran away naked, he shot her to death and then buried her in a shallow grave. So he was only charged with these 4 murders at first and then the abduction and SA of Cindy Paulson. As part of an agreement, Robert explained his murder map and ended up confessing to 17 more murders. And he actually led authorities to the women's grave sites. At this point in time, at least 12 of those were unknown to authorities. And it was then that they realized that Robert likely had way more victims than anyone could have thought. All around South Central Alaska, police found 37 different sets of remains, and they aren't sure if they're all connected back to Robert or not, but it's possible that he killed upwards of 21 women. These are his other victims, 17 of which are confirmed. So obviously we have Eklutna Annie, and Robert admitted to stabbing her in the back when she tried to escape from his car. He said that she was a sex worker, and that was his first victim. But sadly, not much is known about her because by the time her body was found, she was mostly consumed by wildlife. Another one of his victims was 18-year-old Celia Van Zanten. Celia left her house on the evening of December 22nd, 1971 to walk to a supermarket, but she never made it. She was reported missing 2 days later, and on Christmas Day, her body was found in Chugach State Park. Her chest was sliced open with a knife. She was bound and SA'd and then dumped into a really deep ravine. What's so sad is that when Robert dumped her, she was still alive, and evidence shows that she tried to climb up the steep hill, but because she was tied up, she couldn't, and she ended up dying of exposure. Robert denied killing her, but it's assumed he did because there was an X marked right at her burial site. Another one of his victims was 17-year-old Megan Siobhan Emmerich. Megan disappeared on July 7th, 1973 from Seward. She was last seen leaving the laundry room at her boarding school, but her body has never been found. Robert denied killing her to police as well, but again, there was an X mark on his murder map exactly where she disappeared from. And it's been reported that Robert did confess to another inmate about killing her and burying her near a remote cabin only accessible by boat. It also has been confirmed that he was in Seward the day she disappeared, so it seems likely that he was responsible for her disappearance. These are the rest of his confirmed victims. 22-year-old Mary Kathleen Thill. She disappeared in 1975 after being seen near her Seward home. Robert later admitted that he killed her and dumped her body in Resurrection Bay. Like I mentioned earlier, 24-year-old Joanna Messina. She was shot near the Snow River in 1980 after he refused to pay her. Her body was left in a gravel pit and badly decomposed when found. 24-year-old Roxanne Eastland. She vanished in 1980 after meeting a man downtown. Robert confessed, but her body was never recovered. 41-year-old Lisa Futrell. Lisa was kidnapped from a nightclub in 1980. Her remains were found years later buried near a gravel pit. 28-year-old Malai Larson. Malai went missing in 1981, and her body was discovered near the Nick Arm Bridge in 1984. Again, like I mentioned earlier, 23-year-old Sherry Morrow. Robert lured her with a fake photo shoot in 1981, shot her multiple times, redressed her after death, and buried her in a shallow grave. 24-year-old Andrea Mona Altieri. She was abducted for a supposed performance job, SA'd, killed, and thrown off a bridge. Her body was never found. 23-year-old Sue Luna. Sue was hunted through the wilderness after being forced to run naked before he shot her. Robert buried her near the Nick River. 20-year-old Tamara Peterson. She disappeared after accepting a photo shoot offer in 1982. Her body was only found after Robert confessed. 24-year-old Angela Fettern. Angela vanished in 1983, and her remains were discovered near a remote lake the following year. 22-year-old Delynn Frey. Delynn was found on a sandbar in 1985 and was buried as a Jane Doe, but she was identified years later through jewelry. 22-year-old Teresa Watson. Teresa was abducted in 1983 and left where she was killed because the ground was frozen. Her body was discovered in 1984. 19-year-old Robin Pelkey. Robin was found as partial remains in 1984, but later identified through forensic genealogy decades later. She had been stabbed and shot. With all of his confessions and the fact that the bullets found at each crime scene matched back to his own guns, Robert was found guilty. Despite all of his confessions though, and the fact that all of those victims were definitely caused by him, he was only ever formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. I guess authorities could only find concrete evidence on those 4 women, but it's suspected that he could have killed up to 37 women and girls. He was then sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Robert died in 2014 from natural causes, and he was 75 years old. I just personally don't think it's very fair that he got to live out the rest of his natural life while all of those women and little girls had their lives ripped from them at the hands of this monster. And it's horrible that they kept disappearing left and right, yet authorities took over 10 years to begin investigating. Especially with Robert's criminal history. They weren't super close with their families or really anyone that could have quickly realized that they were missing. Robert killer basically thought like a hunter because he was one. Who could he take that would go unnoticed or unbelieved? And sadly, that's how he got away with doing this to so many women for so long. There have been a few movies inspired by this case, like The Frozen Ground, which is incredibly disturbing. They've also used this case as inspiration in shows like Criminal Minds, Cold Case, and Law & Order, in case you've seen it before. I just can't even imagine how scared these women must have been running for their lives like that in the cold wilderness, thinking they had a chance to escape, only for him to hunt them down and kill them. But it's now been 55 years since Robert first started hunting humans on his property, and the wreckage he left continues to haunt those who live there to this day. If it wasn't terrifying enough that these kids were all abducted from the same county by the same man and then held for days at a time before being killed, then add in the fact that their killer bathed them, fed them, and washed their clothes before killing them and dumping their bodies. What could possibly be more disturbing than that, you may be asking? Well, while police were investigating this, they discovered a horrifying CP ring operating on North Fox Island, which is in the same state that these killings took place in. This was essentially another Jeffrey Epstein Island situation, but specifically for young troubled boys. But then police find that these two cases might actually be connected. Whoever killed these kids more than likely visited North Fox Island and traumatized those kids as well, yet they have never been caught. This is the disturbing case of the Oakland County child killer, and it is still unsolved, meaning the killer could still be out there. So let's talk about it. So between February 1976 and March of 1977, a serial killer began terrorizing Oakland County, Michigan, and snatching little kids off the street. 2 little boys and 2 little girls were taken within minutes, and the circumstances of their abductions are terrifying. Each child's body would be found in a public area within 19 days of their disappearance, and they'd all been strangled and suffocated, with the exception of one who had been shot in the face with a shotgun. But what's so scary is that the killer would hold these kids captive for days or even weeks, and during that time he would sexually abuse them, feed them, bathe them, and even wash their clothes before ultimately killing them and dumping their bodies all throughout Oakland County, where they could be easily seen from the road. This story begins with 12-year-old Mark Douglas Stebbins. On February 15th, 1976, Mark left for a pool tournament, but he never made it back home. His mom soon reported him missing, which sparked a quick investigation, and everyone had hope that he would be found alive. His mom would even set out a plate of dinner for him every single night at the dinner table in hopes that he would walk back through the front door. But sadly, that would never happen, because 4 days later, Mark's body was found laying on a pile of wood in the parking lot of an office building in Southfield. He was fully clothed in the same clothes that he was wearing when he disappeared, except they were unusually clean. An autopsy confirmed that he'd been strangled to death and was SA'd with a foreign object. He also had 2 big lacerations on the back of his head, and there was evidence of rope marks on his wrists and ankles, which indicated that he'd been bound during his entire captivity. Michigan State Police tried finding whoever did this, but they couldn't. The only thing that seemed out of the ordinary was some strands of hair on Mark's body that did not belong to him or his family. There wasn't a DNA match in the system, so all authorities could do was pretty much just wait and hope that the killer would slip up. They were hoping that Mark's murder was an isolated situation, but it soon became clear that that was not the case. On December 22nd, 1976, the killer struck again. That evening, 12-year-old Jill Robinson left her home following an argument with her mom over dinner. Just let that sink in. She got into a fight with her mom over what she had to eat for dinner, and then she walked out of the door, never to be seen alive again. The next day, Jill's bike was found behind a local hobby store, and just 4 days later, her body would be found as well. Her body was found along Interstate 75 in Troy, literally in view of the Troy Police Department. She had been shot in the face with a 12-gauge shotgun. She was fully clothed and was still wearing her backpack that she had on when she disappeared. But again, her clothes were eerily clean. What's incredibly disturbing is that according to the autopsy, Jill's killer had fed her and bathed her for at least 3 days before she was actually killed. So now you have 2 little kids, both abducted from the same county and killed. The way they were killed, though, did not match. So again, police were hoping that these 2 cases were not connected. But then, in January of 1977, the killer struck once again. This time, 10-year-old Christine Mihelich disappeared after leaving her home and walking to a nearby 7-Eleven. When she never came home, her mom knew something was horribly wrong, and she was officially reported missing on January 2nd, 1977. This time, 19 days would go by before there would be any discovery, and just like the others, it was very gruesome. On the morning of January 21st, a mail carrier discovered Christine's body on the side of the road in Franklin Village. She too was fully clothed and was in clear view of nearby homes. According to the autopsy report, Christine had been smothered to death less than 24 hours before being found. After the discovery of her body, police could no longer ignore what was blatantly happening in Oakland County. There was a serial killer on the loose targeting these young children, and the similarities between each case were just too strong to ignore, and it didn't take long for the killer to strike once again. On the evening of March 16, 1977, 11-year-old Timothy John King left his house and walked to a nearby pharmacy, but Timothy never made it back home. This time, a massive search was launched, and no stone was left unturned. Michigan police even put together a huge task force involving police officers in 13 different communities. So this was a major operation to find Timothy, and fast. Sadly though, 6 days later, Timothy's body was found by two teenagers in a shallow ditch along Gill Road in Livonia. Just like Mark, he had been SA'd with a foreign object and then suffocated approximately 6 hours before he was found. According to his autopsy, the killer fed him KFC right before he died and also cleaned and groomed him while in captivity, just like the others. So now you have 4 little kids all dead and a killer on the loose that no one was able to track down. I mean, this was national news, and because they were all killed, likely by the same person and all taken from the same county, the person who was responsible became known as the Oakland County Child Killer, and the search for him became a manhunt. And at the time this was taking place, this was the largest murder investigation in U.S. history. Everyone knew about it because it was plastered on every news station, every radio show, and on posters taped all throughout the county. It was huge, and time was of the essence in finding this killer. Luckily, after Timothy disappeared, a woman came forward claiming to have seen a man talking with a little boy who resembled Timothy in the parking lot of the pharmacy where he disappeared from. The little boy was holding a skateboard, and next to both of them was a blue AMC Gremlin. Based on this woman's description, police were able to put together this composite sketch of the killer, which they then released publicly, as well as a photo of a similar car. Now that they finally had a car identified, police interviewed every AMC Gremlin owner in Oakland County, but it led nowhere. However, police were able to create a profile of the killer based on witness testimony, and from that, they believe that the Oakland County child killer is a man between the ages of 25 to 35. He has a dark complexion with shaggy hair and big sideburns. It's thought that he had a job that allowed him to move freely around the county and that made him appear trustworthy to kids, and that he was very familiar with the area and had a space that was safe and secluded enough to keep these kids captive for a long time without making his neighbors suspicious. During this massive investigation, police received over 18,000 tips, which led to about 24 arrests of men on unrelated sex charges against kids. But that's not all. One of the reasons why I made this video about this case is because of its ties to North Fox Island, which I just made a video about. During this investigation and trying to hunt down the Oakland County child killer, police discovered a multi-state CP ring that was operating on North Fox Island. I've linked my other video about the island to this one if you want more information on it. But essentially, the island was owned by this man, Francis Sheldon. He, along with some other child predators, created this fake nonprofit organization called Brother Paul's Children's Mission, and it was advertised as the 6-day island retreat for troubled little boys so that they could mentor them and teach them things. But once the boys were flown to this private, secluded island, they were forced to do horrible things with all of the wealthiest CP customers and subscribers to the island, and with the other little boys there. This was all filmed too. It was absolutely horrible. And I mention this island again for 2 reasons. So while the police were trying to track down the Oakland County child killer, they discovered the horrors that were taking place on this island, and then some arrests were made and the operation was shut down. But I also bring this up because of one of the suspects and his ties to North Fox Island, and I'll go more into detail on that in just a second. So as the years passed, the case grew more and more cold, and as of this recording, the Oakland County child killer has never been found. Whoever killed these kids somehow evaded authorities, and their murders remain unsolved. Despite this though, we do have some theories on who could have possibly done it. Suspect number 1 came from someone who called themselves Alan. So a psychiatrist who was working for the task force actually received a letter from this Alan guy, but it was riddled with spelling errors and seemed kind of erratic. But Alan claimed that he was a slave for the real killer, who he called Frank. He wrote about helping Frank kill these little boys, and he wanted the psychiatrist to print a riddle in the upcoming newspaper. The riddle said, quote, "The Weather Bureau says trees to bloom in 3 weeks." Alan said that he would provide photos for proof in exchange for immunity, but he never provided them, and then he went radio silent. He was never heard from again, so if he was actually involved, no one knows. Suspect number 2 is Archibald Edward Sloan, a child molester who targeted young boys in his Michigan neighborhood. Like I mentioned earlier, Timothy was last seen next to a blue car, and over the years, police have shifted what they think the car actually was. Instead of an AMC Gremlin, it could have been a blue Pontiac Bonneville, and guess who owned one of those? Archibald. But what officially made him a person of interest was, like I mentioned earlier, the strange hairs that were found on Mark and Timothy's bodies. When authorities searched Archibald's car, they found hair samples on a seat that came back as a match to what was found on the boys' bodies. But the interesting part is that the hairs didn't actually match Archibald. They matched to someone that he possibly knew, or maybe even lent his car to during that time. Police haven't been able to track down who this hair actually belongs to. But I guess Archibald was known to lend his car to a lot of random people, so it could be anyone. This, paired with the fact that Archibald didn't really match the killer's description, he was somewhat ruled out as a suspect. The third suspect is Ted Lamborghini, a retired auto worker who was involved in a 1970s sex ring that preyed on young boys in Detroit. In 2006, he was charged with 19 counts of S-ing children, and just a year later, Michigan police made a public statement that Ted was the top suspect in the Oakland County child killings. He ended up pleading guilty to 15 out of the 19 charges against him, rather than accepting a plea deal that would have required him to take a polygraph test on the Oakland County child killings case. He was also offered a reduced sentence to, again, just take a polygraph regarding the Oakland case. Yet he refused, and he rejected this offer. If he was innocent, I don't know why he wouldn't just take the damn polygraph test. So to me, Ted seems like a great fit, but no physical evidence was ever found tying him to the case, so he was never formally charged. The fourth and final suspect is this man right here, Christopher Bush. Christopher was in police custody shortly before Timothy's abduction for involvement in CP, and after he was looked at as a possible person of interest in the Oakland County child killing case, Christopher took his own life in 1978. But two things about him really stand out to me. One is that when police were searching his apartment, they found bloodstained ligatures as well as a hand-drawn photo of a little boy screaming pinned to his wall. The little boy eerily resembled Mark, the first Oakland County victim. There was no known activity from the Oakland County child killer for about 20 months prior to Christopher's death, though, which is odd. In 2012, DNA evidence fully exonerated and cleared Christopher. But what's weird and pretty damning is that Christopher liked to visit a certain island. And can you guess which one? Yep. North Fox Island. He was a known client of the Brother Paul's mission, and police believe that even though DNA evidence cleared him as a suspect, whoever the real killer is likely visited that island and traumatized all those little boys there too. It's just weird how the island plays a huge part in this already devastating case. So those were all of the suspects in this case, yet as of today, whoever killed these kids has never been found. No one has ever been charged in connection to this case, and it literally traumatized and shocked the community. There are 4 known and confirmed victims in this case, but police believe there are possibly 3 more kids connected. The first is 17-year-old Donna Sarah. She disappeared while hitchhiking to a beach in Macomb County, Michigan in September of 1972. Her body was found days later floating face down in a shallow creek, and before she was killed, she had been imprisoned and drugged for several days. Her murder also remains unsolved. The next possible victim is 13-year-old Jane Allen, who went missing on August 8, 1976. She was also hitchhiking, and she was last seen leaving her hometown in Royal Oak in Oakland County. 4 days later, she was found dead floating in a river over 200 miles away from home. Her wrists were tied behind her back with a torn t-shirt, and she died from carbon monoxide poisoning and was dead long before being thrown in the water. The last possible connected victim is 12-year-old Kimberly King. She disappeared from Warren on September 15, 1979 after staying the night at a friend's house. At around 11 that night, she called her sister and told her that she snuck out of the house and was calling her from a nearby payphone. Her sister scolded her and told her to get back inside because it was super late and really dangerous. Kimberly said okay and hung up, but she never made it back to the house, and she hasn't been seen or heard from since. Her body was never found, but police believe that she was abducted and that her disappearance is likely connected to the unsolved child killings. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this case. It's not known how many victims there really are, which is incredibly disturbing. And the fact that the killer changed his method of killing them just slightly each time he attacked is terrifying. But it's now been 50 years. Whatever really happened to all of those kids remains a mystery, and whoever killed them could still be out there.